Speculation 105A, a conversation with Jean Renoir, recorded 11/30/66, air date 12/1 and 3/66.
Hello, I'm Keith Berwick, and this is Speculation. In an age of great specialization, in an age in which men pride themselves on building whole careers in narrow grooves, it is a great privilege, I think, to talk to a man of parts, a man who has many careers and, in a sense, only one, the career of being himself. My guest this evening is Jean Renoir, who is such a man. Monsieur Renoir, I have looked forward to meeting you and talking to you for years, and I now have the chance, and I think it a great luxury for me and for those of our audience who are watching tonight, to have the chance simply to talk with you.
Well, I will try to be up to your good opinion.
Well, I suppose the occasion for our coming together is, in a certain sense, your novel, The Notebooks of Captain George, following on the heels of your memoir of your father, which did so well. And I would think the obvious thing for us to do is to talk something of that novel. And one of the things I'm curious about is the extent to which this novel is autobiographical for you.
It isn't, but it is based on facts I witnessed. I slightly changed everything. I changed the names. I changed the locations. But I don't believe, I have no imagination, very fortunately. My father used to say that the most dangerous quality for an artist was imagination. Because imagination may lead him to forget that nature exists. And he was more impressed by observers than by people of imagination. And I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm trying to tell stories about what I know.
But this is a most extraordinary statement for you, of all people, to make. Because I think the most obvious thing that anybody would say of you is that you're a man gifted with rare qualities of imagination. And are you suggesting, then, that your imagination consists simply in observation?
I have good memory. I remember about everything.
And this novel is set in the period of 1914 and the war.
Yes, before the war and after the war. It ends with the Second War. But basically the main action is before, during, and after the First World War.
Mm-hmm. And if I read your biography correctly, the First World War was a very compelling and a very important experience in your life.
Exactly. To me, and I'm trying to explain it in this book, as I did in God Illusion, in my picture God Illusion, as I did very often, I'm trying once more to explain that this war of 1914, this First World War, is a kind of turning point for the world. Before, we were still more or less living in a world of non-technicians. After the war, we entered a new world, a world of technicians. And that's a very big difference. I don't say that one world is superior to another world, not at all. It's just there is a difference. And, to me, what a very important symbol of this big change is the fact that the war of 1914 made the women free.
Well, in the United States, we always think of the great legacy of the Civil War, which is the freeing, the emancipation of Negroes. The First World War, the emancipation of women.
Yes.
And we are still living with the kinds of problems involved in both of those.
Exactly. In God Illusion, I tried to express it the following way. we are in a prison camp, and there's a theater. The prisoners built a theater in an old stable. And they are getting some costume from Paris. And they look at the costume, and among the costume there are some dresses for women. And those dresses are short. Up to now, they never had seen in a street the legs of a woman. After 1914, we started to see the legs of women. And the hair was short. All of a sudden, you know, on one of my prisoners, you know, learning that in Paris, back home, they are cutting the hair, says, but that must be very strange. You believe that you sleep with a boy.
And I gather, I think it's implicit in what you're saying, that the emancipation of women has bred at least as many problems as it's cured. That is, I get the impression that you think this is not an altogether good thing.
It's good and bad, as anything on this earth. There is no... You cannot think of black without thinking of white also. The world is a balance. As a matter of fact, may I say that there is no black and there is no white. There is nothing is absolutely...
Gray areas.
Yes, nothing is pure. That's something I learned in the cavalry. As a civilian, when I arrived in the cavalry, I said, oh, that's a white horse. And everybody laughed at me. There are no white horses. There are no black horses. There are dark gray horses or light gray horses. They look almost white, they look almost black. They are not black, they are not white. Black and white don't exist in nature.
It's been said of you, Monsieur Renoir, that your work in film now is so far ahead of its time that it can be released 20 or 30 years after the film is made and still seem avant-garde. And I think you've had that experience with one film, have you not?
Oh, I had it with several films. For instance, the last experience of this sort was with the rules of the game. When the rules of the game were shown the first time in Paris, that was in 1939, just before the war. And the audience took it. That was in a very elegant movie theater. I don't know why, but the studio, thinking that the picture was a little unusual, thought we need a very elegant audience, well-educated people. Well, they took the picture as a criticism against themselves. And they were right, I must say. It was a criticism against themselves. And they understood it very well. And the boos were absolutely tremendous. You know, they were so violent against the picture that I saw a gentleman taking a newspaper on a match, lighting the newspaper, explaining that he wanted to set afire a theater which was showing such bad pictures. And the picture was shown now, this is last year, in Paris, in a good theater, and it lasted 6 months. It's a great success now. After more than 30 years of silence.
Well, we were talking a little earlier, a little before the program began, about the art of communication. And you, of course, above all things, have been involved in communication as a writer, as a director, as a producer. And you were saying some very interesting things about this novel and its greatest success. I find it extraordinary that this novel could be more successful, perhaps, in its English translation somewhere than in the French original. You do write in French.
Well, about this idea of communication, this novel, I tried to express my belief, which is more today than it was before, that we have very much to learn from animals. Animals know how to communicate much better than we do. For instance, let's take the subject of this book, love. Well, people, human beings, love for some reasons. They need an explanation. A boy would love a girl because they love the same type of music. As I say in the book, you love Sostakovich, I love Sostakovich, we love each other. I believe that's not true. Or perhaps you love somebody because this somebody will bring you some money, or because this somebody is very beautiful, or perhaps this somebody is witty and makes you laugh. Animals love each other or love a man, a human being, for no reason, for the presence. It's like a radar, like some mysterious rays which put the dog and the man together, or the two dogs together. I don't know how to explain it, but I have the feeling that such a love, which doesn't require any explanation, which is there. You know where I found it? In India, when I was shooting The River.
Oh, remarkable film. I think that's probably the film for which you're known best in this country, is it not?
Perhaps. But you know, when I was shooting The River, I had some Indian friends. Well, in our countries, in the West, in France or in America, you have a friend, he comes to see you, and you know what's the first question? What are we going today? What are we going to do today? You know, you have dinner with friends, after dinner, and now, what are we going to do? An Indian, if he's a good Indian, never asks such a question. He comes, he sits down in the corner of the room, he looks at you, he's happy to be with you, and we spend one day together. We don't say one word. We are just happy to be together. And at the end of the day, he goes back home feeling that he had a good day.
Yes.
I love that.
Well, you used the word love, and I think one way of getting perhaps more intimately involved in the subject of this novel and your concept of what human beings have to learn from animals is to ask, what is your conception of the relationship between love, as you see it in animals, and sex, as you see it in animals? Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who would write this off as a novel about sex, as you yourself would admit.
Yes, well, because it happens that I'm telling the story of a young man who belongs to a certain society where sex is very important. Sex, you know, people believe that sex is a new discovery. Many young people believe that the parents and the grandparents were not as interested in sex as they were. I know that in Paris, when I was a kid, that was a very important question. And in a very high-class bourgeois family like the family of my young man, sex was considered as something you must learn. And
you mean as a craft?
Yes, exactly, you know, as a technique. And they also were establishing a very big difference between marriage and sex. The big preoccupation of this class, of this sort of people, was not to lose the money, not to have to give the money,
You're
to
talking
preserve
about
the money.
Bourgeois now.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, I don't blame them. My bourgeois in my book are very lovable. They are charming. They are just very much interested in money. After all, they are not the only ones. Many people are interested in money. And in my book, for instance, the father, when he sees that the son starts to be interested in girls, the father decides to give him, as a teacher, as a good teacher in sex, his own mistress, because he knows that she is good.
Which is very characteristic, isn't it?
Very characteristic, yes.
Because the good mistress in this kind of circumstance is by definition that wise woman, that is, woman wise to the ways of the world, who is practiced and can introduce him to the craft.
Yes, exactly. And also, the mistress has to use a very decent language. She has to teach the young man certain manners. And practically, she is another teacher completing the education of a young man.
Well, she's at least creating the atmosphere in which learning is possible.
Exactly.
But then we come back to the animals, and I'm very much intrigued by your notion that there is a kind of wisdom implicit in animal life, which is lost on rational human beings, you see, on humans.
Yes.
How would you describe what it is that the animals have?
Well, I don't know how to describe it. I believe I'm trying to talk about it and I hope some people who will read my book will try to experiment it. But how to explain it, I don't know. It is a certain feeling. You know, the feeling of being happy when you are beside somebody. In this book, the Captain George lost his battle horse during the war. And I tried to give to the death of this mayor the same importance as to the death of any human being. And it is. And you feel at this moment a very deep communication between the man and the animal. All of a sudden they are one. And I believe that this wonderful feeling of being no more two, but one. Oh, I have a comparison which perhaps could explain what I have in mind better. I explained that a wonderful explanation in the Christian religion or in the Jewish religion is Adam's rib. Mm-hmm. The woman was made out of a rib of Adam. And Adam, having given his rib as a whole instead of the rib, here. And you have to fill this hole. You have to fill this hole with the woman you love and the woman who loves you.
But is the implication of this that the great love, in your conception of it,
yes,
is that love of a total oneness between two human beings or two animals, two bodies, in which they lose individual identity?
No. I don't think that they lose the individual identity. I believe that one identity becomes the complement of the other one. But they don't lose it. I even believe that differences are very important. It's easier. For instance, my young man here, I go back to my book, my Captain George, will find a great love in a foreign house. Mm-hmm. The girl he loves is a prostitute. And this prostitute is perfectly honest. As a matter of fact, she's very religious. She's terribly religious, so religious that she wants to stop making love with this man when she realized that she loves him. Mm. Because when you work for patrons who give you some money, she explained, well, it's the same thing as to be a waitress in a restaurant. After all, you deliver the goods and you get paid. That doesn't count. It's not love. Mm. But I'm married, she said, and if I love you, I'm cheating my husband. It's a sin.
Why, as a matter of real curiosity here, you who are so gifted in the art and the craft of taking a conception and writing it, directing it, producing it, presenting it in visual form, in film, should have chosen the medium of the novel to present this idea, which you obviously have such a deep emotional investment in and rational investment in. Why the novel as a form?
Well, precisely because I have a deep investment in this idea. And I know that I can write more freely with the medium of a novel than I could for a screenplay. I know very well that I'm not talking about censure. As a matter of fact, I'm not afraid of censure. I even believe that censure may be very good sometimes. I'm convinced, for instance, that when may I say, Molière wrote Tartuffe, which was really a deep criticism of the church, well, since the church was powerful, he had to turn around and to use certain ways which make his play more powerful than if he had been completely free. I'm not talking about censure, I'm just talking about a tyranny which in the picture business is worse than any censure. It is the tyranny of the money. A film has to be successful overnight. A book can wait 20 years. That means in a book you can be more sincere, you can say more.
Oh, well, then this poses the other kind of question. Why have so many of your important ideas then been communicated through film rather than through the novel? That is, you've become a writer in the form of autobiography, biography, novels, and so on, fiction, only rather late in life, have you not?
Yes, very late.
Why so late?
Because I think that what is important is a certain belief you carry in yourself. And you go ahead with this belief and with an urge to tell your friends about this belief. Perhaps not to the whole world, that's very ambitious. Practically, you think of half a dozen of persons you trust, and you would like to tell them what you feel about certain questions. And the way you do it, perhaps is not so important. You do it with a film, you do it with a piece of paper or a pen. Well, the main thing is to do it. I know, for instance, that if I had written the Captain George for a screenplay, for a film, I would be still trying to find the money to make it. Now my book is finished, printed, written, people read it, and I get nice letters from my friends that, that after all, that's a perfect combination.
You talked about how very impressed you are with the English translation of your work.
Yes.
Would you go so far as to say that the English translation is somehow truer to the spirit of this work even than your French original, or would that be a vast overstatement?
It wouldn't be an overstatement, but it's not absolutely correct. The truth is that probably the English translation expresses what I have in mind better for an English-talking public than my French writing. But my French writing is better for a French-talking public. For instance, in the French, the language of my people, I have a big part of the story in the army. And before being a non-com, my Captain George is an enlisted man, and he's in a room with his friends, and I remembered some songs I used to hear in the army. I was also in the cavalry when I was young.
Yes, I know.
It's why I can talk about it. I have a certain experience of the way cavalry people think and their relationship with the horses and among themselves. Well, in any case, those songs I remember, and which are in the book, are perfectly profane. And I don't believe that an English-talking public would like them. But it's why my translator decided to keep them in French. That way the English public who read them will understand them only if they talk French. Only if they talk French, they will understand.
Very, very interesting. What sort of relationship do you see between this work and your memoir of your father and your work in film?
Well, basically, the springboard, the little push which made me write it, or made me write the story of my father, or made me write so many screenplays for films, this little push is about the same. It is always, number one, it is a certain general belief, as I told you, a certain general belief in certain things, in a few principles which I believe are true. But I hate intolerance. If I believe that my principles are true, I would hate it to convince people to adopt them. I like everybody to have his own principles, and not my principles. And I'm trying to carry on the development of such principles among relations, mostly about relations among people. But what gives me what is for me the real springboard for starting a film or any work is my admiration, I should say my love, my affection is the word, for some characters which I love to introduce to my friends, to my public. For instance, this Captain George, I remember him. He existed. Not exactly as he is in the book. But I remember, I love the Captain George. He was my good friend in the army. And I remember him very well. Well, the Captain George of the book is made of 2 or 3 Captain George. But mostly the Captain George of the beginning, the Captain George of the adventure with Agnes, the prostitute. I knew him very well. And I admired him. My affection for him was so great that I would like some other people to share this affection. And it is what made me write about him.
So you're dealing with compelling human beings, composites to be sure, but compelling human beings, And you're dealing also in the realm of ideas, principles, which you hold. And the question that occurs to me here is, at what point in your life did you come to those principles that have been consistent in your work and in your life? And that's a very subtle distinction indeed.
Yes. Number one, when I was a kid, when I was very young, I was very much helped by the statements of my father. My father wasn't at all a preacher, and he didn't pretend to be a philosopher, but he had a certain experience of life, and I loved to hear him, and what he told me helped me a great deal to understand certain questions. I was very lucky about that, with one little fact. That was I was badly wounded, and I couldn't walk. I could walk only with crutches for a while, for several months. And my father was crippled with rheumatism. He couldn't walk. That means we were too crippled. In winter, we were sitting beside the fireplace, looking a little bit the same feeling as I told you with the Hindus or the animals. We were sometimes 3-4 hours without uttering one word. And sometimes he was going back to his recollections or to certain ideas or to certain statements or certain doubts. And I learned many things from him. Now, of course, when he died and I started to have my own life, and I forgot about what my father had told me. And when I remember my ideas in this part of my life, I'm ashamed. I had absolutely stupid ideas. I believed in, for instance, I believed that some people are superior or some people inferior. Putting myself among the superiors one, of course.
Of course.
Of course. But now you are a very sympathetic man. It's why I'm telling you such secret truth. But I'm ashamed of it. Now I know so much that every one of us, we have our little part to play in this big show named the world. And the part played by a bug is as important as the part played by an elephant. And we all have our part, and we just have to be good actors and to deliver the lines properly, and that's all.
All the world's a stage, you see. Here you are, Shakespearean, if you please, talking of this stage which is the world. And to me, it's an extraordinary kind of testament that you who are so gifted should come to the proposition that all men are created equal, and all men are equal, and all beings are equal.
Oh yes, there is no doubt in my mind about that.
And yet, earlier you were implying something that amounted, at least that I inferred, was almost a moral superiority of animals, of beasts, over humans, because of human rationality.
Yes, when I said superiority, I didn't express myself very well. I should say, I believe that there is a kind of equality in all things. If you get more of a certain thing, you get less of another thing. Everything we improve with our intellect. We are living in a perfectly intellectual period. Some intellectuals are stupid, I must say, are ridiculous. To be intellectual doesn't mean that you are intelligent. It means that you work with your intellect before working with your senses. But we use our intellect for everything in life. The housekeeper who starts a cup of coffee, instead of having to build a fire and to work with her senses, to feel the draft, to feel how wet is the wood, to know how the fire will work. Well, she just pushes a button and she has an electric fire. Well, that's just the intellect which works. She has to read or to know, to connect intellectually the button to the idea of fire, but she doesn't work with the senses. And we work less and less with the senses. We work more and more with our intellect. Perhaps it's very good, but what we gain, the intellectual side, we lose it with the feeling, with the emotional side.
Do you know the work of Abraham Heschel, by the way?
No.
You should, I think, because and I will send you Abraham Heschel's book.
Well, thank you.
Man is Not Alone, because in this work, Heschel is presenting a theory of the awareness of grandeur, as he calls it, in which he says that human beings are now so intellectualized and so sophisticated that they cannot see a leaf for what it is, or a stone for what it is, or a sky for what it is, because they already know what it is.
Yes, it's wonderful. Not only I agree with him, but I like to add another thing. Not only they don't know how to look at a bug or at a leaf, but they know that it is a bug or a leaf because they are told that's a bug, that's a leaf. We are living in a center of publicity. Mm-hmm. We want a new car for very unexplainable reasons. We were absolutely convinced and thought all the time. We are surrounded by voices, posters telling us, do that, drink that, eat that, travel, don't stay home, or stay home, or, the tyranny of publicity is probably as big as the tyranny of the kings in the old days.
Mm-hmm. And it works so often in ways that we're totally unaware of. How many of our daily activities are conditioned by messages that we don't even know we receive?
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
And to me, one of the missions, well, the word mission is a great word, and I shouldn't use it, but my English is rather poor and I don't find any other word.
It's the precise word, I think.
Yes. Well, I believe that one of the important missions of the artist is to remove the cliché, is to try to help your friends to see the truth without this kind of fog which is put between the object and our eyes or our mind.
Well, then let me ask you, we've been talking about a certain consistency in ideas that you came to very early, and you invoked the name of your father, and I think it quite clear that your father had extraordinary influence on you. And I wonder how much consistency there is from those ideas that your father's life represented and those ideas that your life represents.
Oh, probably the ideas are different because the world is different and the surrounding does exist. We are very much submitted to what's going on around us. And this is different. But basically, more and more, when I find an idea which I believe is new, all of a sudden I remember that my father told me about it 60 years ago.
Well, you were talking a little earlier about discovery and the discovery of self, the discovery of ideas, and of course I suppose that all of life is really a process of rediscovery of those things we've known.
Certainly. The big difference about this influence of the surrounding, what made Maine different before 1914 in the world of my father was the fact that the individual was supposed to count less. And counting less, he was counting more.
A paradox, one of those paradoxes that so interested your father.
Yes. Yes. For instance, one of his examples, well, let's go back to the idea of women, and this liberty acquired by women now. My father pretended that the women were powerful only when they were slaves. And the proof was given with the influence of women in French history or in English history. When women had no political rights, well, they were influencing the government much more than today.
I think, of course, that there's no question about this, that there is a considerable power in those people who are repressed in some way.
Yes.
Think of the power of minority groups.
Yes.
So-called, so long as they remain minority groups, and think of the powerlessness of those who are lost to the majority.
Yes, the different religions explain us the truth you just expressed now. very clearly in the Christian religion, we are full of statements like the poor will be before the rich, the last ones will be the first ones. And it is true. It is absolutely true. Only the weak is strong.
Then you're really rephrasing the proposition, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Exactly.
A very puzzling phrase to many
very
people.
Puzzling phrase.
You're really talking of this, aren't
yes,
you?
but obviously true. To me, we can see the example of it every day. Unfortunately, we see the example of it every day. Because the conscience of being weak gives excuse me if I change the conversation, it's the same thing with happiness. You know, after all, it is in the richest nations, in the nations where you have everything, food and transportation and entertainments, that you have more suicides than anywhere else. People are easily bored. To me, the real enemy is boredom.
Yes. Well, now, I've been trying, as you've been talking of these very compelling things, I realize to do a very bad thing, and that is to categorize you. On the one hand, I find you described as a man far in advance of his time, in film technique and so on, the phrase avant-garde. On the other hand, I find in you ideas that seem to me at once universal and what many people would describe as very old-fashioned.
You know, the nickname, the man who was the Captain George during the war told me, we were together in an air squadron. I was a pilot during the First World War. And one day he told me, Jean, you are a reactionary anarchist.
A reactionary anarchist, a reactionary, radical, a good many things. I suppose the categories are simply not going to fit, are they?
Probably.
Simply not going to fit. You have talked of your father. You all obviously are a man of great and important loves. I wonder who, beyond your father, stands as a great hero to you.
I had several ones in my life. For instance, when I was in the Air Force, my hero was the hero of any pilot, perhaps in the whole world. His name was Guynemer. Perhaps you heard the name. You know, Guynemer was an extraordinary man. That was the beginning of the fighting business in the sky. That was even before Richthofen in Germany. But the difference between Richthofen and Guynemer was the following one. Richthofen was a tactician. He used to fight, helped by half a dozen, sometimes 1 dozen of other planes.
This is the technician that you're speaking of, who triumphs.
Yes, Guynemer was the last one to fight alone. I saw Guynemer one time. He had to land in any airport, in any airfield, secretly. Because when the Germans knew that he was there, they didn't show up in the sky. They were exactly disappearing right away. That's this influence of a name, this influence of genius, to me was terribly impressive. Now Guynemer, one night, that was dusk, at the end of the day, he arrived at the airfield. I was a very humble photographer, I'm not a fighter, and we pushed his airplane under a hangar, so the Germans wouldn't see it. He had dinner with us. He was very religious. And the next morning, we knew that he got up very early. We saw him, we were all up to see him, said a little prayer, took his plane, Old Charlie was the name of the plane, and went against the Germans. But there were no more Germans, they knew. They knew he was there.
And others, other heroes.
Well, you know, a great hero for many years, even now, perhaps even more now, was Van Gogh. To me, Van Gogh is a perfect example of the great man. And something which impressed me with Van Gogh, it is that he was so great that nobody could understand him when he was alive, only his brother. You know, the story of this man who is one of the greatest painters in the history of art of all the times, when we think that he never sold one canvas, not one, without the brother who was making money in Paris and could send him enough to eat, he would have starved.
What is your opinion of the motion picture based on his life?
The motion pictures, where, on when?
I'm thinking of the role that Kirk Douglas played, which was the role of Van Gogh.
Oh, excuse me, yes. Well,
is that true, and is it successful? I suppose I shouldn't even be asking you this, but it is a question that interests me. Do you think that film was true to your conception of the man?
I don't believe that the film was true, but I believe that the film was as good as a Hollywood production can be. And I believe that Kirk Douglas was as good as a Hollywood actor can be. That means very good. You know, we have to think that we have several ways to consider things. The way to consider a film is probably the way of diffusion, the way of explanation, of how do you say, to make something difficult easy to be understood by the public.
Simplification. Yes.
And in this sense, the picture is brilliant, is remarkable. Now, since I love Van Gogh, my Van Gogh, the Van Gogh I dream, is different. It's different, but it's why, for a while I almost made this picture. Yeah. And finally I gave up. I gave up because I knew that if you make a film, you have to be honest. And you have to admit that the film is a mean of expression which has to be accepted by a very wide public. That means you have to deal with certain clichés. And to myself, I couldn't accept such clichés. And, perhaps I wouldn't succeed in making the picture. I don't say that I refused to make the picture, but I considered the picture for a while, and I gave up.
Do you, in making...
Excuse me if I interrupt you. That brings me another idea. Basically, I believe that it is very bad to make pictures either with real great men or with masterpieces, with literary masterpieces.
Precisely the question I was going to ask, because it's occurred to me that, and this is not a scientific observation, it's just an empirical observation. In looking at various films based on novels that I've known, I've seen that there's almost a reverse correlation between the quality of the novel, or the work, or the man.
Yes.
And the quality of the film.
Absolutely.
Good works, great works, seem extremely difficult to translate into film, and poor works often make extremely good film.
Yes, that's a factor. Myself, I made several pictures taken from great novels. I don't believe they were very good. And
what examples are you thinking
Madame
of?
Bovary, for instance. I made a Madame Bovary long ago. The picture, there are good parts in the picture, but it's, it's not what it should be. It's not Flaubert. Flaubert is much higher than what I did. Then why to make it?
Yes.
After all, if you don't improve the stuff, why to do it? On the other hand, we must not forget that plagiarism, in my opinion, should be encouraged. I'm absolutely in favor of stealing ideas.
And there's no such thing as stealing ideas, really, is there? Right. I mean, that's really what you're saying.
No, let's use the right word, which is plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism. You know, after all, Shakespeare was a plagiarist.
The greatest plagiarist?
Yes, he used so many Italian short stories and old plays, and so did Corneille and Molière and Racine and all of them. You know, all of them, they considered that the works written before themselves was a kind of a basket where they
could... Great repository to reach into.
Yes, belongs to everybody. I agree with that. But I believe that the work must be so far away or must be so bad that you are not influenced by this work. When Shakespeare takes an inferior little Italian novel named, for instance, Romeo and Julieta, and makes Romeo and Julieta, the little Italian novel is nothing. It's a springboard, and the whole creation belongs to Shakespeare.
Yes.
To me, what is very bad in any work, I don't see in any work of art, because another thing, I don't believe in art. I believe that everything is art or nothing is art. But in any case, the only thing which counts in art, let's use the word provisory, is the possibility for the author to create something. Well, if everything is already created in the original work, you have nothing to say. You are just a copyist. You have to copy, that's all. And that's very dull. And the result is dull.
I'm still pondering your paradox. Art is nothing, or it is everything? Was this what you said?
I love the 18th century definition of art. Art was the making. Science was the knowledge. And I believe it's so clear, so pleasant, such a definition. Today, art became something very vague. You know, you are an artist when you think. That's not true. When you think, you are a scientist. You are an artist when you make.
And you are, of course, a maker. As I understand it, you virtually began as a potter, did you not?
Yes, I started making potteries. And I loved it.
And you even made the bread.
Yes.
Again, as I understand it.
Oh,
that is, you carried this through the whole cycle.
Yes.
From conception through creation and use.
Yes.
Was this a kind of microcosm of the kind of principle that you carried into filmmaking?
Yes. Number one, I believe that in any field, perhaps more in the field of happiness, of search for happiness, than in any other field, what is important is the making. The result, of course, helps. It counts. You make a picture, well, if the picture is successful, it's more pleasant. But the great moment, the great trail, yes, on the making.
Well, then, do you watch your own films?
Oh, yes. 1 or 2 times after they are done.
Why?
To check. To be sure that the sound is synchroned.
As a technical matter.
Exactly.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm wondering so many things in the light of what you're talking about. I'm wondering, for example, what sort of responsibility you feel for your creation after it's created.
I'm only starting now to pay a little attention to my old films, and my wife insisted very much, and I gathered a few old prints in 16mm of my old films, but that's new. Before, I didn't care. A picture is made, it's made. That doesn't interest me anymore. What is interesting is the making.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But now, after all, I'm starting to be not extremely young, and some of my pictures were done very long ago. And when I look at them, it's a little bit as if I was looking at a new picture.
Do you, in making a film or in writing a book, have in mind any audience at all?
Yes, few friends. I like to feel, this one would like it. oh, I shouldn't write this line because this other one wouldn't like it, or they don't write the line. You know, for instance, for Captain George, I received letters from my best friend. Well, now it's done. I have the result. I'm happy. I had wonderful letters from Duvivier, René Clair, François Truffaut. You know, wonderful letters. Henry Miller.
We were talking a little before the program, I think, about Ingmar Bergman, and he, of all filmmakers, Truffaut would certainly be another, but he is one of the very few filmmakers, along with Jean Renoir, whose stamp is placed on his films, unmistakably, so that one could not possibly imagine that the film was made by anyone else. Do you know Bergman personally?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. I know his work very well.
Are you an admirer of
Oh, yes, I'm an admirer,
Bergman?
definitely. You know, even in the pictures I don't like, because you don't like everything by an artist, even in the picture I don't like because of the story. Don't forget that Bergman is a man from the north, is a Swede, is a Protestant. I'm from the south, I'm a Catholic. We are very different. And certain things he does seem to me a little puritanic. For instance, his approach of sex is not my approach of sex. Sex in his imagination is much more important than in my own imagination, and less important also. But still, to me, he's the great filmmaker in our days. He is, number one, he's the only one who produced film in a very logical way. Practically, logically, the way he does should be adopted by the whole world. It's wonderful. He makes pictures for very little money. His troupe is also working on the stage. That means they can earn their daily bread during the winter. You know, and in summer they gather together, they shoot one film, two films. It's wonderful.
And then, of course, he has the very interesting concept of almost a repertory motion picture company.
It is extraordinary. That's, to me, the only way. My dream during my whole life was to do it. I never succeeded.
I'm thinking now again of the question of communication. And I have heard it said a number of times recently that the things that any people or person have to tell another people or person are not those things that that person or people wants to know, and vice versa. And I'm thinking of this in relation to your remarks about Bergman. He is from Sweden, from the north, puritanic, and so on, you from the south, and so on. Do you think that you and Bergman, because he could hardly help but be aware of your work, but be an admirer of yours, do you think that he and you are communicating effectively with one another through the medium of your films?
I think so. I think that when I see a picture by Bergman, I can catch some messages which to me are messages to me. I don't know if Bergman does the same thing about my pictures, but I do it about his pictures. I believe that's the mark of an artist. You know, who had it in a tremendous way? The Pope, John.
John. Yes.
You know, when the Pope John was talking at the balcony of the Vatican, everyone among the audience, there were perhaps 100,000 people, I don't know how many, crowds, every one of them was absolutely sure that he was talking personally to him, and only to him. To me, that's the mark of a great showman.
Yes, but, you know, there's an interesting problem involved in that. We're talking about what historians and sociologists refer to as charisma, this quality that some human beings have of being able to communicate to great bodies of people as though they are talking to each one. And yet the potential for demagoguery, the potential for evil in such a person, and I'm obviously not talking about Pope John, but let us go from the sublime to the evil and the ridiculous. Hitler had such a quality.
Of course. We cannot deny it. And what was coming out of Hitler was not people say he was eloquent. He was not so eloquent. And people who were as eloquent as Hitler. Oh, that was this writer I was talking about my book on the relation with animals. It is the same thing. So I believe that every one of us, we emit a kind of radar. And that it happens that this radar fits with the radar of another human being. And now, what is very dangerous, it is the fact that the radar which can reach the crowd is often a radar of very inferior quality.
Well, television, for example. Look at the great gods of television.
Yes, we have to pay. You know, we address great crowds, and we have to pay for that. We have to pay for that. You are one of the rare examples of a show where we can really express everything we feel. That's an exception. If you want to go ahead in the show business, you have to follow the taste of the public. To me, that's nonsense. The only thing which is interested in art is to try to proceed, to be ahead.
Yes. Which has to do with human fulfillment of something broader than career aspiration toward what is called success.
Yes. Well, the religion of the success is very dangerous.
Would you say
it
that...
may be deadly, even.
Well, I think there's no question about this. That is the most uninteresting, the most boring, dull people of my experience are those people who are narrowly career-oriented, bent on success.
Well, I know some of them who are very nice.
Yes.
Well, not only nice, but very intelligent and very remarkable. But they are caught in a kind of crank, in a kind of mill, and they cannot escape anymore. Well, what is very difficult, in any period, any time, under the kings, what was dangerous was to go to jail. Now, the dangers are different. But what is very difficult to remain a free man, not to be the prisoner of a king or of a system. Now we may be the prisoner of the system very easily. And I believe that's what we have to fight against.
Which I think is one of the messages that I have seen in your films, by the way. I'm thinking of this in somewhat different terms now, in terms of what seemed to me a very wise perception. The notion that there should be no distinction between work and play.
No.
That one's work should be one's play, one's play should be one's work.
Yes.
And that the life worth living is a kind of seamless existence which sees no such distinction.
Yes, I agree.
Now, would you go so far as to say that in the distinction you were drawing between the artist and the scientist, between art and science, that the artist is most likely the man who obliterates that distinction between work and play? I mean, you have certainly done this, and you are.
Speculation next week presents Keith Berwick and his guests in another lively discussion. We invite your comments and welcome your suggestions on future topics for Speculation. This has been a studio production of KCET.